Hey, that's better. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to kick off this symposium. My blood is definitely hopping at the moment because I ran from the parking lot. I was a few minutes late. To make sure you've either had enough coffee or that your blood's moving or that you can stay awake through my presentation, I want to continue the hand exercise by kind of learning how long have you all been doing work in the GreenDuwamish watershed. So first of all, I want to see a show of hands of everybody that's been working 0 to 10 years in this watershed. Raise your hands. Now, this is not a trick question. Everybody should be raising their hands at the moment. So because even if you just started today, even the younger students there, today is day one. So keep your hands up, okay? Keep them up, keep them up. Okay, now I want to see those of folks that have been working 10 to 20 years in this watershed. Keep them up, keep them up. How about 20 to 30? Keep them up. More than 30. I figured James and Greg would be in the mix there. So yeah, how about a hand for James Rasmussen, Greg Wingard? But that's really a hand for all of you as well, because I'm going to talk today about collectively creating a more resilient GreenDuwamish watershed, and it really takes everyone over a sustained period of time in order to get this job done. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a historian, but in providing context for the day, I'm going to touch on a bit of all of those. I'm also going to talk quite a bit about the work that the county is doing with many of the organizations in this room. This is not something we do alone. Again, collective impact is going to be my watchword. In my role as Director of Division, I think about this a lot. I think about how to better integrate the work that the division does across a very broad portfolio. The Department of Natural Resources and Parks is even a bigger portfolio. The county's bigger than that. And then, but I also need to think about this as the work we do across with the NGOs and the business sector and the academia world and the volunteers. And so I just think that collective impact is a hugely important concept. It's actually an academic term. Some of you probably know that. I'm not necessarily referring to it in that sense. Collective impact is a commitment of a group of actors from different sectors. So again, we saw the diversity here between private, public, non-governmental organizations, business, and people. It's a commitment from those broad sectors to a common agenda for solving a complex problem. And I think restoring the GreenDuwamish, making a healthier watershed more resilient, is certainly a very large and complex problem. The organizations commit to coordinating their efforts and work together around a clearly defined goal. And the underlying premise of this is that no single organization can create large-scale, lasting social change alone. There's no silver bullet. Problems cannot be solved by simply scaling or replicating one organization or program. It really takes all of us working toward a common agenda, having a shared measurement system to assess performance and ensure accountability, mutually reinforcing activities, and continuous communication and coordination, much like today, the symposium, which is a great opportunity for communication and coordination. So as I proceed through the talk here today, I'm going to talk about some, I think, good examples of where it's happening, other areas where I think there's opportunity, so I want you all to keep that in mind, particularly as you do the deeper dives throughout the day. So it's already been mentioned, Rory just mentioned a diverse watershed. There is a tremendous amount of diversity in this watershed, nearly 500 miles. Some folks like Ryan 9, they include Vashon Island, so you can add about another 150 miles if you want to include Vashon. But you're looking at about a 500 square mile watershed. It's bisected by the GreenDuwamish, starting in the headwaters of the Cascades. It's about 93 miles long. 700,000 plus people, 16 cities, all within King County. Diverse land uses as you start in the headwaters. There's some pictures there that describe some of the diversity. You got great elk habitat in the upper watershed. That's Howard Hansen Dam. I'm sure you all know. You progress, so we got 47%, nearly half of the watershed is in forestry. As we continue downstream, You get into agricultural lands, which are only 5%, and that's also in the lower green, of course. 36% of the watershed driving through here through the bad traffic. I think most people can appreciate that. 36% of the watershed residential. 9% industrial commercial. That's largely in the lower Duwamish. And then we have 3% parks, which we hope to continue to grow. The diversity of the people here. Last year, Kent was ranked number 10, Renton number 24 in terms of looking across the United States. Some of the most diverse cities in the country out of more than 500 assessed for 3 factors of cultural diversity: ethnicity and race, language, and birthplace. So it's a big watershed, got a lot of complexity, and it actually has a very complex history that some of you may know. Again, I'm not a historian, but some of you may know the story of how we changed the rivers in the system. So what you have here are conditions pre-1906 and our present conditions. And what you see here on the left is prior to 1906, the Green used to feed into the White River. And the White River actually met up with the Black River at the confluence of the Duwamish. And in 1906, there was a rather large flood event that bounced the White River down into the Stuck. About 10 years later, we decided to make that permanent. We engineered the White flowing into the Stuck. The Stuck basically disappeared. That same year, in 1916, saw the first ship pass through the Ballard Locks, which lowered Lake Washington by more than 8 feet. That, in effect, dried up the Black River. And we rerouted, and so the White River became the Green, and the Green flows into the Duwamish. Black River pretty much disappeared, and Cedar River was diverted into Lake Washington. Pretty amazing engineering marvel, if you want to consider it that way. Really messed with our river systems, and we've been trying to restore them ever since. And eventually, and of course, we weren't through with that. The chronic flooding in the Green River Valley, with the completion of the Howard Danson Dam in 1961, that kind of completed the work. Of course, it wasn't just, we didn't just engineer those rivers, we also engineered Lower Duwamish. What we have here is a picture. 1909 is how the Duwamish looked. The light blue reflects that. You had about 5,200 acres of tidal mudflats, marshes, tidal swamps, and riparian habitat. It was the Lower Duwamish today. In about 1913 to 1920, the Army Corps began to dredge, fill, straighten the Duwamish, and the filling and dredging continues. That 5,200 acres of tidal mudflats, marshes, and tidal swamps, barely 2% of that remains today. The indigenous people known today as the Duwamish use this area since time immemorial for winter villages and benefited from the rich resources provided by the estuary. But of course, the river was changed and it became industrialized. And so this next slide is one that is looking both at modern day picture of the newly formed Duwamish, channelized Duwamish. And it's a picture of, actually the outline here is the federal Superfund site. So it's a kind of a transition from the past to the present. The Duwamish became basically the industrial heartland that made King County the economic engine of the state, starting at the turn of the last century. Of course, with that industry came industrial pollution, which took its toll on the Duwamish for much of that past century. Agency and community concerns were growing in the 70s and 80s, primarily due to pollution from past industrial practices and development. There are concerns with current, but certainly most of it was associated with the past. EPA listed, this actually led to the EPA listing the Lower Duwamish as a Superfund site in 2001, which again is outlined there in the slide. That necessitated, maybe you call it regulatory collective impact, but 4 parties got together quite quickly after that: Boeing, Port of Seattle, City of Seattle, and the county. We formed a group called the Lower Duwamish Working Group, otherwise known as Ludwig. entered into an agreement. That's not to be confused with the drums, by the way. Entered into an agreement to perform site investigations on the nature and extent of the contamination and evaluate different cleanup alternatives. So over the past decade, the Ludwig partners have invested approximately $200 million in studies and early actions that have resulted in the cleanup of about 29 acres of waterway sediment. This has reduced surface sediment levels of PCB contamination by about 50%. And while this and other pre-Superfund work are already making a positive impact on the river's health, we obviously have a long ways to go. So I mentioned it's not just about past pollution, it's also about current. This is a conceptual model of pathways of pollution to the lower Duwamish waterway. And you can see the immense amount of challenges that we face in modern times. You have everything from ongoing industrial discharges, spills and leaks. You have upland groundwater contamination. You have the legacy contaminants from contaminated sediments. You actually have pollution coming from upstream, depositing into the lower Duwamish. To complicate matters, we have air deposition. We actually, our challenges are not just local sources, but as elsewhere on the globe, some mercury and PCBs are carried in the air and deposited into our watershed. But perhaps the biggest challenge we face is stormwater. It has been long considered the #1 pollution threat to Puget Sound, and it's a threat not just to the lower Duwamish, but throughout to the entirety of the watershed, the GreenDuwamish watershed. And so we at the county have several programs. In particular, we're working with the city of Seattle on a number of programs to try and address stormwater challenges. We have the Rainwise rebate program. It actually works with property owners to manage stormwater by installing rain gardens and cisterns. We've invested about $360,000 in the Duwamish to help this rebate program with property owners over the last few years. But the big investments are really in the combined sewer overflow program, which is designed to reduce the volume of untreated storm and wastewater of combined sewer overflows during storm events. And in the lower Duwamish, the county is making significant capital investments. Two projects under construction are the $35 million Rainier Valley Wet Weather Storage Facility and the $230 million Georgetown Wet Weather Treatment Facility. And I think if you've been just north of the First Avenue South Bridge there, you can, just of the bridge there, you can see the Georgetown facility. The bad news is the uncontrolled combined sewer overflows contribute 85% of the fecal coliform bacteria entering water bodies today. The good news is by 2030, the county and city of Seattle will have these CSOs under control. The more good news is a recent study by the county showed that our region's past investments in water quality are paying off. Water quality trends have been improving over the last 40 years for bacteria, nutrients, and oxygen, even as our region's population, developed area, and economy have grown. So that's the one thing people always tend to lose sight of that. Oftentimes we hold the line on environmental protection or we make some gains. Doesn't feel like it's a lot, but we're doing this in the face of growth. And that is just one of several challenges that we face. There is no single program. The CSOs is one hugely important program, but it really takes a variety of programs in order to bring the region's water quality into compliance with standards. It's going to take a combination of efforts. And just the pictures here, you've got the rendering of potential storage on West Duwamish. We have anybody from Dirt Corps here? Dirt Corps? Yeah, Dirt Corps. That's actually a Dirt Corps crew. Yeah, give them a hand. Got to keep that blood flowing. That's Dirt Corps. They're restoring West Duwamish Greenbelt. That's a planning they're working on there. Community Rain Garden in the lower right there on Southern Street in South Park. And a rendering of the Georgetown Wet Weather Facility. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, stormwater is not just a challenge for the Duwamish. It's a particularly intense challenge there, but it's a challenge throughout the watershed. I think it was 2014, the county and city of Seattle initiated the GreenDuwamish Watershed Strategy. It was a much broader strategy than just stormwater. And it was to craft a vision with the GreenDuwamish community, and the goal was to coordinate work already being done by basically all of you, local, state, federal, tribal governments, NGOs, business, to manage habitat restoration, salmon recovery, flood control, public health, economic development, and more throughout the entirety of the watershed. Fairly ambitious. But the idea was there was a recognition that there's already a ton of work happening, and how can we better coordinate that for greater collective impact? And we worked with a watershed advisory group. It actually was kicked off here on this campus, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. But we ended up working with 45 different organizations to develop an initial report that looked at 4 areas. One was improving air quality to advance public health, and that is now being led by the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. The other was the integration of climate change resilience and preparedness into the work that we do at the county, but also all the other organizations, City of Seattle, other cities, and actors throughout the basin into the work that they do. The third area was a watershed-wide open space strategy, which I'm going to talk about the Land Conservation Initiative in just a bit. And the final was a watershed-wide stormwater management strategy. So that role was actually picked up by the City of Seattle, the county, and Department of Ecology. And we since partnered on the development of our GreenDuwamish stormwater strategy, in which more than 30 organizations throughout the watershed with stormwater expertise participated. We collaborated to form a vision and a mission with 7 goal areas, 67 strategies. We're actually reconvening the technical work group next month to do a deeper dive on implementation and coordination. We're developing an inventory and mapping tool at the county to better identify at the high level. When you're dealing with the watershed strategy, it's easy to talk about programs, but when you actually want to get down on the ground, you need better tools. And so we have a mapping tool we're developing to better identify the programs and projects that can help prioritize stormwater management strategies throughout the watershed. We want to identify 3 or more early stormwater management actions to actually begin implementation. And there's a long-term goal of actually building a formal collaborative structure around this work that can guide development of an implementation plan. And when I think about collective impact, this stormwater really is the area that really cries out the most, because we have examples of it in other areas. I'm going to talk about one here shortly that I think is really powerful, but we really have a lot of work to do on stormwater. Million trees by 2020. One of the specific climate resilience strategies called out in the county's climate action plan is to plant 1 million trees by 2020 in both urban and rural areas. As you know, trees not only store carbon, but they contribute to clean air, water, healthy habitat, and more livable communities. I want to point out a couple things. One is that there is absolutely no way that we can do this alone. And by the way, this slide's a little misleading because those should be stacked on top of one another. We're doing a little better than that little green bar there. These are, and those numbers there show the trees that the county is planting in green and that our partners are counting in blue. And we just got our numbers for 2017 last week, so we're still compiling those numbers, so the partners' numbers will come in there. When you total all those up, you will see, absent even the partner numbers for 2017, we're at 260,380 trees. Yeah, that's good. Give yourselves a, who's planted trees, by the way? Raise your hands. Oh, maybe I should ask, who hasn't planted a tree? Okay. Well, let's plant trees if you haven't, it's fun. So at any rate, but it's still, I mean, King County needs to ramp up its effort. We know our partners are ramping up their efforts to reach 1 million trees by 2020. We're not going to get there. It's not just in the unincorporated, it's in the urban areas as well. We have a table here. Ashley's going to be staffing it throughout the day. Our call to action is simple: volunteer, plant, donate. And so we're looking forward to continuing working with you on this ambitious goal of 1 million trees by 2020. Regreen the green is what you might consider kind of a focus, like where do you put those trees to get the most benefit? The county recently created a new basin steward, a lower green basin steward, to work across jurisdictional boundaries to achieve the riparian revegetation goals identified in the RIA 9 Regreen the Green study. So it's like where can you get the most benefit from planting those trees in the lower green? Successfully implementing this strategy will require commitment and coordination across multiple jurisdictions, emergent theme here, as well as support from nonprofit partners and community-based organizations who have experience working directly with the Green River Valley residents. We've talked about the diversity, the economic and ethnic diversity. We really need people that can reach those folks in this area. The partners actually have recently identified a need to shift from the ad hoc mode that they've been working into a more formalized and sustainable partnership to achieve shared goals, strategies, messages, and outreach tools. Sounds like collective impact. It's another example of what we're trying to do. And some of our key partners here include the cities, of course, in the area, Auburn, Kent, Tukwila, and key NGO partners like Forterra, Earth Corps, American Rivers, King Conservation District, and Duwamish Alive Coalition. So, you know, at the watershed scale, RIA 9's been at it since 2005. They're 12 years in on restoring habitat and more specifically ecosystem processes and functions throughout the watershed. You cannot see all those dots. It's not by design, but there's a ton of projects. Those dots represent $156 million of projects over the past 12 years that have been overseen by this collective of 17 partners working equally on behalf of all these local government jurisdictions, of which King County is just one. This is, I think, perhaps our best example of collective impact in the basin. You know, back in 2005, the RIA put together its first science-based habitat plan. So it's a common agenda. They have, they measure their progress over time. So are they making progress on this ambitious agenda that they have put forth? Mutually reinforcing actions across, throughout the watershed. The RIA works to mutually reinforce the work they're doing on the habitat goals, and they continuously communicate and coordinate. And I was at a meeting the other night where many of those folks have been there, much like James and Greg. They've been at this a very, very long time, communicating and coordinating over time. So in my mind, 12 years in, they're just in the process of updating the salmon habitat plan. I think just a huge shout out to the great work RIA 9's done over the years. And I may ask them to take on stormwater. I'm kind of thinking about that because, it does become a challenge for us, though. How do you do more collective impact work and you don't want to create new organizations? So that's much of what we try to think about is how do we you coordinate folks, but can you do that without a formal organization? Well, RIA 9's done a heck of a job over the years, and again, a huge shout out to them. I want to point out, and this one's even more hard to read, isn't it? This actually shows you projects being done by the King County Flood Control District, which is actually a separate government from King County, as well as some of King County's, the work that's done in my shop at Water and Land Resources Division, some of the other projects that we do. And so each of the stars there are represent completed projects, and the yellow diamonds represent future projects. You have the lower green on the left, you have the middle green on the right. There's just a few pullouts there, 3 projects I just wanted to briefly touch on. The first there, starting on the far right, is the $5.5 million Porter Levee setback project that was just completed a couple months ago. That's in the middle green. Created significant habitat and also required raising a roadbed. So, sometimes these habitat restoration projects, you're doing other infrastructure improvement work while you're at it. The project had multiple funding sources from the Flood Control District, Floodplains by Design, the county, and RIA. And while I'm mentioning Floodplains by Design, also a huge shout out to them. That coalition working at the state level has done a great job of heightening the awareness about multi-objective opportunities associated with flood hazard reduction. By that mean when we're doing good flood hazard reduction, it also brings along additional benefits such as habitat restoration, protection of ag lands, and sometimes recreational benefits. So the more we can be doing this multi-objective work, particularly around flood hazard reduction, that's just a great opportunity. The middle project there is the Reddington project. That was done with working with the City of Auburn, the Flood Control District. This 1.3 mile levee setback project reduces flood hazards, restores habitat, and provides recreation opportunities. And I mentioned Reddington because at a cost of $17 million, it was the most expensive project completed to date. That is until we actually get to that final project there on the left, which is the current Lower Russell Road. That's Van Doren Park there. The Lower Russell Road levee setback is slated to cost $50 million. Pretty massive project. The county and the Flood Control District are working with the City of Kent on this 1.4 mile long project. I consider this a signature project of the Green, as does the Raya and others working on it. It's going to require moving Van Doren's Park and relocating a lot of those recreational facilities, but it's also going to create a tremendous amount of habitat. So we're very excited about Lower Russell Road project. More dots on a map. More dots. This is actually funding from Waterworks, which is this is a program administered by the Wastewater Treatment Division, another division of the Department of Natural Resources and Parks. In the forms of grants and council-allocated funding, Waterworks provides water quality funding to nonprofits, schools, educational institutions, cities, counties, tribes, special purpose districts. And of course, we encourage partnerships in that work. In the GreenDuwamish, about 26 projects have been funded, totaling more than $2.2 million. In addition, another $900,000 has been invested in education and outreach projects that also provide benefit in the GreenDuwamish. Just some examples of this, cities of Black Diamond, Covington, Maple Valley, and Federal Way have constructed low-impact development facilities to manage stormwater. Seattle 2030, speaking about the private sector, they have a project to catalyze the private sector around green stormwater management. It funds smaller organizations such as Delridge Neighborhoods Development Associations and funding a wetland restoration project. And then several organizations are promoting stewardship, something essential to all the work that we do. Seattle Tilth, Earth Corps, ECOS, and actually just another shout out to ECOS, who, given the diversity of this watershed, particularly in Lower Duwamish, they have a multicultural spill kit incentive program that was funded by Waterworks. So great work all. Now I want to talk about, I think, one of the most exciting initiatives I've come across in my professional career, which is the King County Land Conservation Initiative. I mentioned earlier in the GreenDuwamish watershed strategy, the open space effort. This is really how it's how that work is manifest. The vision of the Land Conservation Initiative is to protect the remaining high conservation value lands and secure our trail network within a generation, within 30 years, basically finish the job. Now, this is not new. I mean, the county's been, and others, we have a lot of NGO partners in this work. We've been working on land conservation since 1970. About 190,000 acres have been protected, including many lands in this watershed. This land conservation initiative has been championed by Executive Constantine, but it's really been powered by a very diverse volunteer committee. And when we talk about these high-value conservation lands, we're talking about natural lands, farmlands, rivers, so a lot of the floodplain projects or salmon projects I talked about, urban green space, trails, and forests. And you know, and we're not talking about, and I want to say that the Land Conservation Initiative has actually mapped, priced, and prioritized in these 6 categories 65,000 acres across the entirety of the county. So that's 3 watersheds. Approximately 1/3 of these candidate parcels are in this watershed, Raya 9. So when I say protect them, the initiative proposes to protect these lands either through outright acquisition, purchase of easements, or through tax incentives. We're not going to buy them all. We don't need to buy them all, but we need to find a way to protect them. So we have a variety of strategies to do so. I'll call out in particular the urban land piece, that we are working with all 39 cities in the county to identify priority lands in the incorporated areas. This is not just about protecting the green space in the unincorporated areas, but it's also about in our cities where we live, connecting these together. The county has one of the county's big initiatives is equity and social justice, and what I really like about the Land Conservation Initiative is an opportunity to actually drive that policy, that work, into the work that we do. And so a particular theme of the Land Conservation Initiative, a pillar of this initiative, is equity. You know, we've discussed diversity a few times. Of course, diversity is not equity. You know, we live in this region, I mentioned the 190,000 acres. We live in a history that has this really strong history of protecting open space and creating trails and recreational opportunities, yet not all of our communities share in the benefits of these public investments. Many communities have experienced and still experience a history of unequal and limited regional investments in parks, open space, trail access, which affects it affects their daily lives, and not just that, it affects their health. So this is another one that's relatively hard to read, but it makes a point, and we actually have a blow up over here that you can see on the break. Land Conservation Initiative, we've identified again down to the parcel, those little red pixels reflect communities that have historically been left behind when it comes to open space. And when I say communities have been left behind, there's three factors here. Neighborhoods that do not live with access to public open space, that are in the lowest 1/3 for income, and are in the highest 1/3 of hospitalization rates for key health metrics, heart disease, diabetes, and asthma. And so as a starting point, the Land Conservation Initiative is proposing to invest $160 million in these communities to, in effect, change those red pixels to eliminate them. And again, while you can't see where they all are, I think you can get the sense that they're predominantly in the south end of the county here. So this is work that ties directly into an initiative that we would like to see move forward and can help us address a healthier, more resilient watershed, not just for the ecology, but for the people, the diverse people that live in it. And it's not just an equity strategy, it's not just a land use strategy. As I mentioned earlier, it's also a public health strategy. Ready access to open space yields proven and profound physical and mental health outcomes. So we can help move that forward if we can move this 65,000 acre effort forward. And you know, our region's changing around us, we all feel it, everybody talks about it every day. This plan to protect the most important natural lands and urban green spaces, we need to do this in the face of the pressures of a rising population and climate change. The advisory group that I mentioned, they delivered their recommendations to the executive and council in December. So just a couple months ago, their recommendations have been forwarded. So now it is up to our elected leaders to determine how they would like to move this forward. Speaking of change, we all know climate change adds complexity and urgency to the work we're doing in the GreenDuwamish. Impacts, I think we had a focus on at the first symposium, impacts of climate change, increasing annual and seasonal temperatures, decreasing snowpack, shifts in timing and volume of seasonal stream flows, sea level rise, changes in extreme events, some people call that weather weirding, and ocean acidification. So the actions we're taking at the county are documented in the county Strategic Climate Action Plan, which is set to be updated in 2020. The actions documented are really about specific commitments, and again, I'm going to come back to Million Trees as a clear example of that. However, you know, just checking those boxes isn't going to be enough. We need to continue to build resilience over time. You know, pay attention to the emerging science, changes in our communities, and progress on specific preparedness actions. So I've got two slides I'm going to end with here that provide hopefully some context. Number one, this is a timeline that this is my, when I think about the GreenDuwamish and the history here, this is what I think about. What you've got there on the left are approximately the first 100 years, starting with the discussion of navigable connection between Lake Washington and Puget Sound as far back as 1854, during the period of Manifest Destiny. The first ship passes through the locks in 1916. Boeing begins building planes in the Duwamish shortly thereafter. Howard Hansen Dam completed in 1961. Now, there's really no good way to demarcate what I would consider more the renewal phase of the work we're doing here. The bubbles down below, the first one there is the Federal Clean Water Act in 1972. Certainly that was a huge change in the way we thought about our waterways throughout America. So I started with that. There's a number of others on there, as you can see, including the Lower Green Agricultural Production District. Perhaps we established that a little too late. We want to grow more ag land in this area. I got the Ryan Salmon Recovery Plan. I got the symposium noted there a couple times because I think it's an important event, as well as Duwamish Alive. I think I love the work that they do. But I want to focus on, well, in the 1972 Bolt decision, I should have mentioned that. That's been hugely impactful, affirming the rights of treaty tribes to 50% of, and co-managers of salmon. But the two boxes I want to focus on are a couple. There's been many people devoted to work here over many decades. Two of them raised their hands earlier today, but two others I want to point out. One is John Beal, who in 1979 decided to single-handedly tackle Ham Creek because he felt the fish could be restored there, which at the time, if you knew Ham Creek, was fairly audacious. I had the good fortune early in my career to meet John Beal, and his passion, his curmudgeonry, it's actually stayed with me ever since. It's one of the things that motivates me in my work. The other is Andy Levisk, who I didn't know. He left the county a year before I came there last year, and he bioengineered the first project on the Green River at Lowndes Levee in 1991. And he was really the first person that really began to rethink how we manage rivers. He championed restoration of natural processes into flood hazard reduction projects, and that is the basis for our work today. When I think about the true kind of catalyst for the renewal age here in GreenDuwamish, I'd really point to two boxes there. One is the 1999 listing of Puget Sound Chinook recovery for protection under the Endangered Species Act, and the other is the 2001 Superfund listing by EPA. So I really think it's really just been the last 20 years that we've been at this collectively, and sometimes that's driven by regulatory or by crisis. Somehow we have to build on that further. My final slide here, when I think about, I mentioned I think about this a lot. These wordles just kind of throw all the words up there, so you should see your name somewhere in there, but they don't connect them. So sometimes when I think about collective impact and all the work we're trying to do, this is in my head. It's all so crazy, but we need to somehow focus this in a way that comes back to this shared common agenda, this shared measurement to assess performance and ensure accountability over time, the mutually reinforcing activities and continuous communication and coordination. I've been truly fortunate. The one piece of my resume that was not talked about, I spent the first 15 years of my life working at the Washington Environmental Council, so I spent a lot of time beating up on the state, Department of Ecology, King County, others. And after beating up on ecology for 15 years, I ended up going to work there for nearly 12. And now I find myself in the role as being regulated by ecology on a lot of things. And so there definitely are differences in the way, I do my job. But what really strikes me in the work that I've done from all three organizations is how similar they are in terms of their commitment to the mission, the people, the passion to land, water, air conservation. It's just, we have so much more in common, and I know that's true of everybody in this room as well. And so while there's always room for healthy disagreements, healthy tension around how we do this work, somehow, we need to find a better job of advancing that common agenda. And I think the symposium really offers that opportunity. So I'm really excited that as we progress through the course of the day, that we find more opportunities to connect, communicate, coordinate, and hopefully that results in greater collective impact for a more resilient and healthier green Duwamish watershed. So thank you and have fun today.
Thank you, Josh. Rain, are you ready to do questions? Did we have any questions?
So you said that you took recommendations to King County Council last year, and I'm wondering what you think the appetite is for more funding, because that's what we all need, funding. So what are you projecting on the funding forefront for more funds now that this is sort of a priority?
So that, of course, is a very challenging question. I talked to neighbors and friends this weekend who just received their property tax statements, and so there is the electeds need to pay close attention to, they have a lot of things they want to get done. I know our executive is very committed to the Land Conservation Initiative, and but there's a lot, homelessness is a big issue that people are thinking a lot about. So there's it's this age-old challenge of competing demands, and where do they want to go? And I think even more so now with some of the recent investments being made in sound transit and in our schools statewide, which of course are both hugely important. There's just, is there an appetite to put something more on the ballot is a big question. So that's something that I know council and the executive are struggling with right now. I think all of you, if folks want to make it clear how important this is, that might help influence their thinking. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, Josh, another question for you regarding fish passage. When is King County going to provide 24/7/365 a functioning, 24/7, every day of the year, every hour of the day, now I get it, functioning fish ladder at the Break River pump station for Black River? You got to make your writing a little legible, so I don't have to stumble through these questions, but thank you. It's still early. We're getting adjusted here. Through the pump station for endangered salmon.
That is a project that is currently being worked on. So I think it's, I'm not going to tell you the date, but it's still a few years out. That is an archaic old structure that is in need of a lot of retrofitting, including fish passage, but that is something we are very committed to. The executive is actually, there is a lot of talk around the culvert case that was just appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Executive Constantine, even before that was appealed to the U.S. Supremes, he came to the Department of Natural Resources and Parks and said, what can we do to accelerate the removal of barriers throughout King County? So much like the Land Conservation Initiative, what's it going to take to finish the job, which is probably a decadal job or two, but we're currently working on plans to put together and work with the tribes and our partners on putting together a prioritization scheme for removing barriers throughout the county. Black River is a really important one that's going to cost a lot of money, but we currently are slated to do that within the next few years. But if you want to get back to me directly, I can get you a specific date on that by talking to the team that's working on it.
Please do. Okay, I'm going to shift to Monica. I had the pleasure a couple weeks ago, and many in the room probably were, in University of Washington Bothell Cascade campus. And what we learned there was their work over the years to address stormwater on site with a functioning wetland, as you have done here. Are you aware of that?
I've heard about it.
Great. And what also we learned was that they're using this natural system as a classroom and a laboratory for students. Is that happening here?
Yes, it is. So we have a lot of students come out and measure. So they're paid internships, and then we just hired another student to do all the reporting and the consolidation. So ours is the first in Washington State and the nation, and then other models have been created off of it. So we've got about 5 years left in our monitoring process.
Great. And that's something really important for longevity and success of a project is monitoring and maintenance.
Especially with the unstable slopes, and you're changing the hydrology of the land, or of the water table. So you have difference in trees and vegetation coming in, so.
Okay, Josh, you mentioned John Beal and Ham Creek. What is happening to Ham Creek and the Seattle City Light location right now?
You should probably ask James that question. I don't know. I know that's one of the things that got John Beal fired up all those years ago, and there are still people fired up about that. I don't know the details of that, so I'm going to have to defer on that. I'm sure James will opine on it. Nope. No. So they're not building the facility, James tells me. Rory, you want to take that?
Yeah, due to the economics of the situation, it was decided not to proceed at this time. So hopefully in the future, we'll see what happens.
Thanks for that update.
We're having an event this Saturday at Ham Creek, for those of you who want to join us for there. I'm with Dirt Corps, so we're restoring parts of Ham Creek this Saturday.
Awesome.
All right. So,
Dirt Corps.
and Josh will be there planting the trees. Okay, Josh, another question regarding Longfellow Creek. Longfellow Creek is part of the GreenDuwamish watershed. Can we be updated on efforts to daylight more of Longfellow Creek with attention to outflow into the Duwamish waterway in particular? So please address the challenge of right-of-way and funding.
So I know just enough about Longfellow Creek. Folks know that was a creek that really brought to attention people's concerns about pre-spawn mortality, about fish dying before they could even spawn. It's one of these urban creeks that people care a lot about. What I know about Longfellow Creek is I think it's a great opportunity for the county, the city, and others in the watershed to collaborate on a restoration opportunity. I mentioned our GreenDuwamish and that we want to focus in on some specific implementation strategies. I'm also interested in specific pilot projects, and Longfellow Creek is on my list. I know there's a lot of complications, there always are, but I can say that it's something that I'm committed to pushing on. So if folks have ideas on how I can help move Longfellow Creek forward, I'm all yours.
Okay, well, warm thank you for Monica and Josh this morning.